this panel is covering decentralized clinical trials. And we have obviously Stefan, and we have Reputable Health, we have Cerebrum DAO, we've got Molecule, and I think I'm forgetting one more. Huh? Future for Care. Thank you. Perfect.
Incredible. Sure. Amazing. Hello, everyone. So I'm Aaron Weaver. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Molecule. I'll be moderating this session. And I mean, the discussion really here is about decentralized clinical trials and effectively how to leverage patient participation and maximize the degree of meaningful output out of these studies. So, I think one thing that the biopharm industry sort of struggles a little bit, well, at least deems to be effectively a challenge, is that trials are super expensive. They have very unpredictable outcomes. Not all stakeholders have a huge degree of visibility around what's going to happen. And it tends to be inherently the riskiest part of the process that we undertake, because human biology is just a lot more complicated than we actually understand it to be. But we've got a very diverse set of stakeholders and participants within the ecosystem here. And so what I'd like to do is just turn the mic, starting with Stefan, who's doing a double act now. We couldn't get him off stage.
I was opening up.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, this is part two. But anyway, I mean, just a quick introduction across the panel.
Yeah, very nice. So you already have seen me speaking. Maybe another fun fact about me. So I built that molecular IPNFT stuff. I care a lot about zero knowledge. And I care about maximum decentralization and getting out the middleman, like figuring out how can you build a system that everybody can use without asking anybody else, right? So nobody should stay in the middle between data, users, and profit.
Hello, I'm Mark from Cerebrum DAO, working on product and also trial organization and execution.
Hi, my name is Estefania Escobar-Kölle, and I work for Future for Care, together with pharma CROs and startups, bringing them together for innovation.
Hi, I'm Kyle, Reputable Health. We actually started as a DAO. We were on that landscape that you saw yesterday back in 2022. We're now a decentralized science platform and research org.
Seeing that you're holding the mic, I'll probably direct the first question to you.
Bring it.
And this is just to provide a little bit contextual overview to everyone. So maybe just explain the differences between a conventional clinical trial and a decentralized clinical trial, and what perceived benefits are, and I mean also probably like where have you seen any issues in terms of running decentralized clinical trials?
Yeah, it's a great question. So historically, clinical trials, you have to go somewhere, you have to recruit, it's very expensive to do these things. I've heard numbers in the US of 5,000 to 50,000 per participant, which is insane and probably not really reasonable for DAOs. In decentralized trials, people can do it in their home. Who has wearables? Oura rings, Apple, right? We all have them. We're all generating data. So how can we harness that data and actually make that data meaningful? So decentralized trials can do that. There's at-home labs, all these sort of things that make it a lot easier. And I think to your point on benefits, I would say cost, right? Out the gate is a big one. We can get that down to a few $100s per participant.
Maybe I'll just sort of step in here and I can sort of turn questions over. And if anyone has a conflicting view or anything that they'd like to add on top, please let me know around that. But I mean, it was relatively uncontentious what you effectively said. But actually, Mark, I wanted to turn it to you because in the sort of group chat we had amongst this, there was an interesting point that you made about like gathering real world evidence and trying to define clinical endpoints. And this is, I come from a Web 2 TradSci background, also TradFi too, before transitioning into this. And we had companies that had hundreds of millions of dollars invested into them, and they had pain points with regulators because they were fighting about endpoints. on clinical studies, right? And so there was a lot of uncertainty running into these things, which caused a lot of disruption and friction within these entities. And, everyone believed they were delivering very meaningful patient outcomes in terms of the study they were doing. But, it's such an interesting point you brought up because, this should really help alleviate a lot of the risks. So, I'd love to, hear your thoughts about how you go about that.
Yeah, so I've had, I think, good bit of experience over the past 5 years in different organizations where we're setting up clinical trials, work with a CRO. One was for a neurotech product, and then there was a debate if it's a medical product or a consumer product. Do we have to go through a full clinical trial for it? And what I really love is the potential to do a form of a real-world evidence trial, which is traditionally done where a product has already gone through a clinical trial, it's deemed safe, and I think this is one of the most important things, protecting the people who are actually doing the trials. But I think if DAOs can have a model which is approved by regulators, where we use wearables on a wide scale, also with our different cognitive assessments for Cerebrum, or Microbiome DAO, for example, doing their data collection. And we can use this as a way to do large-scale data collection under a study approval, where we're exploring endpoints as opposed to having one specific intervention that we're trying to target. And then the next layer in that is working with companies like Reputable Health, where the endpoints have been very well defined, the outcome is known, the statistics, how many people we want to test, for how long is more well defined. I think this is it really makes sense also when you hear about what the NIH is talking about right now, where they want to have more data, they want to use AI into establishing new ways to develop drugs. So it seems like everyone would want to do this. We just want to make sure that it's done in a protective way. And the incentive system, where we can then bring in the tokenomics for individual DAOs to be the incentive for those real-world trials, I think is really important. Because you also have incentives for running your decentralized trials, Kyle, and it makes sense that that's the way it's being done right now. But I think we can add this other layer so that they work together to improve the overall drug and intervention development pipelines.
Maybe just a follow-on question to this, and this is just sort of poking at one of the pain points. I was speaking with the head of regulatory of a big pharma company, who was sort of telling me about how painful it is to run a study in the United States because of the dropout rates and other compliance-related issues. So, I'm curious. I hadn't sort of experienced this recently, but there's a concept of a professional patient. It really turns up in neuropsychiatry studies where they say they've got depression. They don't necessarily do. Mm-hmm. They take payment and then drop the medication in the bin and then and walk out. But on how would you think about perverse incentives if you're using tokens effectively to incentivize people coming into studies, because obviously you want an objective result, and I think conceptually it's the right way to steward people, because the hardest barrier is actually participation and getting people motivated to run the study. But conversely, how do you think about?
Well, I think so. There's participation and also compliance. I mean, with any sort of drug study, I think that's a big challenge with decentralized trials, because by nature, you don't have a doctor with the person every day administrating an intervention. So I think that people should be invested in what is being investigated, whether it's microbiome or whether it's neurodegeneration. So I think there should be that incentive that this is being done for the good of science, not just for the compensation that you could be receiving. And I mean, that's the big biased question, right? I mean, if you're doing a trial for Pfizer and you own stock in Pfizer, that would also be a bias, right? But I don't think that's restricted, as far as I know. So there's the incentives, but I think also for wider data collection, if we have a standard for how this is being done, then we can also alleviate some of those concerns.
Honing on the data collection point, this is Stefan, a question for you. Discussing data health, health data sovereignty, right? And it's pretty topical at the moment because of the 23andMe bankruptcy and things sort of floating around the web about deconsent your data so that like people don't get it, etc. But I mean, like, I'd love to hear more about your views on like, is this too overlooked? Is Web3 like a big game changer here in allowing people to have sovereignty over their health data and the way it effectively gets used?
I think I don't know if everybody potentially still misunderstands one thing. Web3 is, of course, never so much about privacy in the first place, right? If somebody knows your account, somebody say it's pseudonymous, right? But it's pretty easy correlatable. So you're pretty much doxed when somebody knows your account. This is why Web3, from a blockchain perspective, doesn't solve any privacy problem at first. You need strong encryption, you need decorrelation, you need several accounts, I call it session keys, lots of those things. In preparation of the talk, I have a slide on it, which I didn't show, is actually the HIPAA is actually themselves, or HIPAA is, they have a long list of data breaches in the health ecosystem in the United States. And it's
probably very long, by the way.
Oh my God. I wasn't aware, and since I'm a German citizen, so I'm not so much looking at what's happening in the United States for data breaches, but I was looking at that list and it's really insane. I would recommend everybody looking at that. It's insane how much data is flowing off official systems. And some people could ask the question, okay, but does that matter? Who cares about my health data, right? There's also a study about the black market price of health data, and health data by far is the most valuable data you could lose or sell.
Who's buying it?
Yeah, this is what I was wondering. So it's not me. Maybe we should build a black market DAO or something for health data. I don't know. So just buy all of that. You must be very aware that privacy in this space plays a major role, and nobody, at least not users, usually are willing to pay for privacy. Privacy is not really a business model. Like you pay $10, so your data is very, very private. This is not really how it works. This is why I would say privacy always has to be a first thought, and every application should be as private as possible. And I'm doing that because I say, well, what if we just build one profile? And this is very secure because the best developers in the world built that. Please join me. Then nobody has to take care about that problem again, right?
So funny. It's like the corollary to the story about the start of PayPal when Max Levchin went to Peter Thiel. He said, oh, this encryption technology would be amazing for people to protect and make private what they're doing within the companies. And Thiel said, no. No one cares about privacy. Just allow them to send money encrypted. That's a much better use case. And
I think when we also talk about privacy, we forget that it's not just your data being private, but you also having access to all your data, right? When we talk about clinical trials, like the traditional way is you have participants, they go through a trial, and then sometimes they have access to the outcomes. Most of the times they don't. And then when we looked into Decentralized, actually what this does is empowering patients to have access to their information on a long term. So I think we sometimes just forget to look at it from both perspectives in terms of what do patients gain, but what do also other players gain, and how do we use that healthcare data, for a lifetime, and what are the implications for patients that are participating in these clinical trials?
You're connected to pharma and bigger parts of industry, and I'm just curious here about like how deep do they see the value proposition within this, and particularly as how they also think about like decentralized clinical trials and just like the use of like Web3 and like even if DeSci is effectively on their radars.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think we all know that pharmaceutical industry is very closed down, especially when it comes to R&D, because it's just so capital intensive. And so it takes such a long time for them to look into a compound, then do the test, then move into clinical trials, and then launch it. So the risk in there is it's extremely high, and most of it, fails, as we know. So when you come to pharmaceutical industry and then you say, hey, we have this new way of having a different perspective, having more diversity in participants for the trials, of course, it's really appealing, but it actually increases the risk. So we have to make sure that the use cases we're bringing to the pharmaceutical industry are actually very compelling and reduce that risk. So I know that there are initiatives in Europe and in the US from pharmaceutical industries and CROs, like IQVIA, for example, where they do have, let's say, working groups, or they do have initiatives that support decentralized trials. However, that's still a bit like a side business, like a speedboat when you have the tanker. Some pharmaceutical companies are more invested, but I think it's hard sometimes for us to consider that it might not be fully integrated into the traditional R&D perspective.
What's the friction? Like, why is it just because it's a tanker and it's just set up that way, and they don't want to move in that direction, or is it like they're worried about the risk of execution and people being non-compliant in studies? Like, what makes it so difficult on their part to lean into this?
I think I would say there are three key factors when it comes to, let's say, integrating decentralized tools into traditional R&D in pharmaceutical industry. First one is the human component. R&D has been done in a way that we know it for decades. It has changed, of course. We have AI, we have tech, we have everything coming in, but still the processes remain the same, and people just know how to work the way they work.
It's just like riding a horse when everyone's driving by you in a Model T Ford.
Exactly. It's like, why do I have to learn how to drive a car if I have a horse? It works. It takes you places. The effectiveness, different story. But human component is definitely one thing. The other part, I would say, is transparency. And it's really funny because, of course, we all want to have the evidence, and we all want to have access to the clinical trial because this is going to FDA, this is going to BFAM, this is going to the institutions. But sometimes some results in clinical trials are not really convenient to publish, especially when there is failure, especially when there are some side effects that, they're not the most attractive to be disclosed. So it's this fear of risk and reputational risk. And I would say the third part is definitely patience. So pharmaceutical companies are just very used to having patients in the studies, and then that's it, that's over. But, and like you said, acquiring a patient is $5,000 to $50,000. So there's like a whole industry that is also sustaining the traditional business model that is interested in keeping it the way it is.
They obviously don't care about Eroom's law and the diminishing returns within industry.
Absolutely.
I always find it crazy that they say people need to accept that it costs $2.6 million to make a drug. It definitely doesn't need to cost that. So, Kyle, it brings me on a question about just metrics and just quantifiably what's different with running trials in a decentralized fashion. So just maybe anything that you could share numerically around expense, time, just more ease in being able to effectively collect that and, benchmarking against what it might look like conventionally.
Yeah, so our platform, we're able to recruit pretty fast within the platform, and I realize that there's other issues that arise with that. We have mostly people that already have wearable devices within our platform that then get recruited based on inclusion-exclusion criteria. We have to go outside of the platform oftentimes as well. But I feel like we're able to recruit a lot faster for studies, and I would see DAOs having the ability to recruit within their communities really fast as well. And then for us to get something through IRB all the way through the study, I think we're talking months instead of years, which is kind of a game changer as well. So those are some of the timeframes. And then in terms of cost, traditional studies, you could probably talk better to what those are costing, but I would say in the millions, and we're able to do decentralized clinical trials, starting pilots somewhere in the 20, 30K range, all the way up to, a few $100,000.
I got to say that's pretty impressive because I've seen things with some eye-watering numbers. And with the current state, at least the biotech markets, becomes rather quite challenging to navigate around that. So I'm curious, Mark, I just want to ask you a question about just running decentralized clinical trials for brain health and how you think about how you set them up relative sort of quantitative measures. And, just keeping people engaged, because it is a little bit of a black box for people effectively studying it. And so generally it's if you want the best type of study, stick them in an fMRI, all of that. Obviously that's insanely expensive. How do you strike the right balance on needing to get great data, but trying to keep the cost down?
Well, that's all part of the discussion on the study design and the endpoint. So for one of our studies, we're using cognitive assessments as one of the standards. So tests like the MoCA, it's Montreal Cognitive Assessment, it's been developed to be administered digitally. This is also important. Like, for example, if you go in to get an assessment for Alzheimer's, you go through a relatively basic, form, but it has to be administered by a medical professional. This is what I went through with my mom. With cognitive assessments, they're going to be administered and validated already by an organization, and then we can take those over because we understand how the general population is going to score with the MoCA. If someone has mild cognitive impairment, we know what the score should be, and that's also what we're using for the trial recruitment. And then when we wanted to go to the next level, what you say the brain, it's difficult to image because it is, for many people, a black box. It's not going to be economically feasible to do MRIs usually, although there are costs hopefully coming down in the next maybe decade with cheaper MRI machines. So blood biomarkers are another thing that we can use, where we can see evidence of proteins or interactions that are related to memory. For example, the accumulation of amyloid or tau in the brain, which is one of the critical endpoints we looked at. So we found that we could do a dried blood spot test, which means a person can get a kit, they basically get some blood from their arm, and then they can just mail that in, which means they don't have to go in for a fluid biomarker blood draw, like into a hospital. What I'm really excited about, though, for the future is the ability to also bring in more neurotechnology products, either things that are based on like FNIRS or EEG, either EEG earbuds or smaller devices where we can do assessments, which would be related to understanding also how cognition is changing over time with different brain signals. So I think if you then take a step back and say, okay, there's cognitive assessments, there's traditional wearables, there will be new cognitive wearables coming up, there's blood biomarkers that are easier to capture, then you see you can actually capture quite a bit of data with a decentralized trial. You won't get the MRI unless you're paying a lot more money, but you really can understand what's happening in the study with the participants relative to the healthy populations. And that's really what we capture with a clinical trial. So I was actually impressed that we could actually pull so much together into the current trial design, but it was an evolution, and now it's acting as a benchmark or a template for future trials. So if we raise another IPT for another indication, it's going to be a lot easier and faster to set up the next trial. And I think that's the really cool thing going forward.
It's an incredible flywheel, because it's like you also want to point at, like, I just keep on saying this, like point at the cost effectiveness of being able to do this and sort of say, and demonstrate that you've got like real quality real quality like data output around it. So I'm sort of running up against time here. So one last question to all the panelists. It's so, over the last few years, there's been a little bit of a breakdown in trust between scientific experts, public health authorities, and the general public. And so like, the one thing I think is like really exciting about the prospects of DeSci is to be able to bridge that gap in trust, and it's to be able to make science visible, transparent, and also bring people up at least to the trust of the education curve in a way that, I guess the question here to, I'd ask all of you to answer one at a time is, what do you think the role DeSci, DAOs, and decentralized clinical trials have in like reinstituting that gap in trust?
I would like to second what Paul usually says. It's all about capital formation, right? It's like getting...
Wants to make money.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about the money. Silly. But this is really, I think we are on, and also this is a very known phrase now, we are on the way or on the path to citizen science, right? Or stadium science is also another big catchphrase. Palm Science is gonna present in 2-3 hours. I think we are moving towards a future where science is not something that's done exclusively in some kind of ivory tower, right? And now you have to ask the question, how do you participate in that whole movement, and how can you profit from it, and how can everybody just contribute their little piece? And I think decentralized or Web3 technologies are just a nice way of taking out friction technology, right? So you can I don't know, use wallets to identify users. You can use all the cryptographic primitives to make that consistent. It's breaking up technology friction, I would say. This is my point on it. Besides that, DAOs redefine the way how communities work a little bit, right? Because you also have a token aspect on it. Everything more or less works in a standard way. And I think once you know how a DAO works, you can actually build DAOs on very specific problems. This is why I love this BioXYZ ecosystem idea.
Yeah, so I think DAOs are there to empower the people who want to get a better outcome from participating. So if you look at all the people in the core team at Cerebrum, like Yatan, Brian, myself, we all have stories about brain health or neurodegeneration, where we thought, okay, we can contribute to this organization to create a framework for getting the data, creating interventions, and bring them through the full development pipeline. And we want to extend that story to other patient groups, to other foundations and organizations to bring more people in. For me, that's the idea. Change the science economy just from mainly publication to data creation from the ground up, so we can have a better understanding and empowerment for ourselves, the patients, and then translate that to the next level of development.
I think having been a member of a couple of DAOs in the past, what I find really interesting when we're talking about clinical trials and patient empowerment is how can we actually create a more equal equation in terms of pharma, science, and patients. And this comes with a couple of questions that I think it's hard for us to like cover through, and also I think pharma doesn't have the answer either. This comes from replicability to patient diversity to following outcomes, access to the data. But I think DAOs actually have the possibility to answer some of those questions in the long term. So I'm really looking forward to see how those communities can be embraced by pharma and how we can move forward.
I had a company in the nutraceutical world come to us, and they were wanting us to put together a 3-arm trial for them, and it was around their product, but also a product that's out in market that is mimicking their product. And his words floored me because he said, I want to agree to publish before we ever get the results, even if our results aren't good. And they're a multi-million-dollar company. And he's like, I'd rather burn the thing to the ground than let people get harmed by this product that's out in market. And it brought me back to why you guys are all involved in your DAOs. Like, you want transparency, you want radical transparency, even if it doesn't work, right? Let's know that, let's iterate, let's get better. So I think that's the promise of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because, scientific methodology is inherently about falsifiability. And there doesn't seem to be anyone sort of coming out and saying, well, this doesn't work. Or I was telling the story before about all the hidden dark secrets within pharma companies where biotechs raise hundreds of millions of dollars chasing what they think are novel targets that have already been tested by pharma and not validated. And they don't move anywhere forward. But yeah, look, I'd love to thank you all for coming and participating today and sort of sharing the knowledge that you have around that. And onwards and upwards. Let's see some more decentralized clinical trials, some big punchy health outcomes, and let's make everyone stand up and notice. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.